do we finally have some signs of a McLaren revival, something for McLaren fans to cling to after so many years of pain? It would appear, from what we've seen at the start of the 2019 season, that there are some good signs. We've seen McLaren's in Q3 and we've seen them fighting for and scoring points. And I've got Jake Boxall-Legge and Ben Anderson here to discuss what's going on with McLaren. So Ben, let's get Route 1 straight out the box. Do we finally have signs of a McLaren revival based on what we've seen at the start of 2019?
Oh, I think we've certainly seen signs of a McLaren reset. If you remember the last season with Honda in 2017, the car wasn't too bad. Certain circuits, very competitive. I think Alonso was fastest of all in Q1 or close to that in Mexico. Things were up and down, but they had a fuzzy picture in terms of the engine and the chassis.
They still felt the car was much better than it was.
Yeah, they did. They felt the chassis was amazing and the Honda engine was letting it down. The truth was somewhere more in the middle. Then 18, we know they screwed the chassis up, really. Had a fundamental aerodynamic problem starting at the front of the car, and that ruined the whole season. They couldn't develop the car. They pretty much wrote it off from the summer, and we were pretty much writing the team off as well. You've got so many structural upheaval behind the scenes and technical changes. It takes a while for this to kind of bed in. At the start of this season, it looks like they've at least corrected the fundamental problem. They've built a decent car. I think they've surprised themselves a little bit. They were keen to talk down Lando Norris' Q3 performance in Melbourne. They were similarly pouring cold water on their performance in Bahrain. Both cars in Q3 for the first time since 2017. Was a very strong weekend for McLaren, but equally a weak weekend for some of their midfield rivals. Alfa Romeo missed all of the crucial FP2 session with water leaks. Toro Rosso messed up qualifying entirely. Haas, their aerodynamic performance was all over the place, strong in qualifying trim but weak in race trim. So I think McLaren weren't flattered necessarily, but we also had Renault not really quite getting their act together. They weren't running their engine properly, and that car was much quicker in race trim, probably the best of the midfield performance. So signs that McLaren are back on the right track. It looks like they've reached a kind of 0 point in terms of understanding that they haven't been building the best F1 cars ever in the last few years. They've started to bed their structure in. Gilles de Ferran's talked about the culture of the team shifting to being a bit more collaborative and a bit more honest about its failings and its strengths and its weaknesses. And hopefully they can build on the encouraging first couple of races. But of course the big test will be as they add more and more developments onto the car through the season. Will they plateau, or will the 2019 McLaren just keep getting better?
Jake, Ben very handily there talked about the development race or McLaren's performance within it perhaps being the deciding factor in how we'll assess this season as it develops for McLaren. And I think what's quite interesting is we had a new development that seemed to work in Bahrain. So talk us through it, because what we're looking at here is the bargeboard area, which we're kind of expecting to be the most important area of aerodynamic development with this year's cars. So if you can get this right, that's a very good sign for what you're trying to do for the rest of the year.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the problems that McLaren had last year was no matter what upgrades they chucked at the car, it just didn't seem to be coming off of them. There was a sort of reasonably well publicised problem with last year's McLaren in that when it was taking a corner, it would suddenly just shed a lot of downforce and they weren't really sure how to get it back. But it seems that this new bargeboard package works, and it works in an area that last year they were having a massive amount of trouble in. So the edge here in the original bargeboard package, that was a lot more straight, and it's now a lot more complex, if you like. It forms a pre-bargeboard here ahead of this main plane, and it's just aggressively turning the airflow outside the front of the car and around towards the side pod package, and doing so a lot more aggressively than the previous design did before. So what you're doing here is driving airflow around the side pod undercut, and then it's taking the path of least resistance, and then when it gets to the rear of the car, it can help activate the floor a little bit more, creates that pressure differential to a greater extent. They also reprofiled this barge wing here. Again, that's helping direct flow downwards and turning it around that undercut. They sort of lowered the middle portion a little bit here. You can't see it so much on this drawing, but that's part of what they did, just to try and draw as much flow off of the back of the tyre, work it into something a little bit more usable, and then send it on its merry way. But you also get a nice little look on this picture as well of the front of the floor here and these little teeth, and that's just trying to clean up the airflow as it enters the floor, making sure that there's no intermittent strange flow patterns that will ruin the diffuser or anything like that. So there's a lot of detail work going on here. That's going to be the main thing this season. As you said, it's going to be one of the most important areas. It's been quoted that it now produces helps with at least a third of the car's performance, so aerodynamically at least. So it's such an important part now, especially with simple front wings. So yeah, it's a good thing to see that teams are making this effort. They've identified an area where there's a lot of gains to be made, and it's good to see that McLaren have got it working.
Yeah, I mean, this was on the car in Bahrain. This is Giorgio Piola's drawing from the Bahrain pit lane, effectively. And a great sign that McLaren has been able to finally add an upgrade to the car that worked. Because you both mentioned there the fact that not only were there fundamental flaws with the car as a platform itself last year, the simple fact was whatever they did to it, whatever they tried to put on the car, didn't work as well. So even if we're tempering expectations slightly compared to the results that we've seen, if we believe that McLaren's midfield rivals might be a bit stronger than they've shown at times, is the real positivity that we can take from McLaren here just the fact that the car does seem to fundamentally work and that we've seen just a successful upgrade finally?
Yeah, definitely, and we have a benchmark in that Fernando Alonso drove the car in the Bahrain test, and he just said it was just better in every single way. The grip seems to be there. They're making the most out of this Renault engine, which it's not a terrible engine at all, or power unit rather. McLaren seem to just slowly be moving along the right path. Whether that's going to play out towards the end of the season, that's the key thing, because they started off reasonably well last season. Then by the end of the season, they were the 9th best team. So they've got to keep this up now. The onus is on them to just keep developing upgrades, not rushing things out in reflex, but rather to just continue with a path and making sure that no stones left unturned and that they, keep updates going.
Yeah, I think the fact that Alonso's been in the car and he knows better than most how bad the 2018 McLaren was. The fact he's come out of the Bahrain test with positive comments from driving the 19 car suggests McLaren are back on the right track, at least in terms of resetting their basic car understanding. The Renault engine is certainly strong. I think they proved that in Bahrain. I do think if the Renault Works team had been able to operate their engine correctly, they probably would have been ahead of McLaren. But it gives them a good platform on which to build. Encouraging now they've got James Key in as technical director and Andreas Seidel starting soon. So the new people who will start looking longer term at the car for 2020 and beyond, they'll be beginning to integrate into the structure. It will be key to see how they blend in with the team that's already there and how everything works together. Pat Fry's back in there as a consultant, old school McLaren man, so he'll probably be quite key in terms of gluing the new bits with the old bits in terms of personnel, if you like. So yeah, a good start to the season for McLaren, probably slightly better than they expected. But as Jake says, they started last season quite strongly with Fernando Alonso behind the wheel, and then it all fell apart from kind of after Barcelona onwards. So hopefully for McLaren fans that won't be the case again this year.